We have been listening live to the National Chief Perry Bellegarde speaking out, among other things, about the call for the Pope to come to Canadian soil to make an apology to Indigenous Canadians for the residential schools and the Church's role in running those schools. For more on this, I want to bring in Niigaan Sinclair. He is an associate professor in the Department of Native Studies at the University of Manitoba and a columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Bonjour, hello, nice to be here.
Some pretty powerful words there from Perry Bellegarde, including on Canada Day. I'll get to that in a moment with you, but first of all, I want to get back to this issue of the Pope apologizing and the National Chief reaffirming what we knew, and that there was a delegation of leaders, Indigenous leaders from Canada, making their way to the Vatican in December. As he said, it's in the works for a couple of years now. Not necessarily expecting an apology there, but the Chief saying we do expect to formalize a request for the Pope to make his way to Canada at some point in the future. In your opinion, what would that mean to have the Pope apologize and do so on Canadian soil?
It's crucial for the Catholic Church, which is still present in many Indigenous communities, to begin to rectify and perform restitution. But most of all, if there's any reconciliation whatsoever, there has to be a commitment on behalf of the upper echelons of the Catholic Church and a stopping of the refusal to acknowledge the harms the Church has perpetrated, which we are only finding out parts now because they have refused to release documents citing concerns like privacy and so on. And so the Catholic Church is still very much participating in a violence involving Indigenous peoples, never mind the fact that many Indigenous peoples are Catholic, like my great-grandmother. And for those of us who have inherited that legacy from the Catholic Church, where we care deeply about that relationship, it's important and integral for those not only who are Catholic to have that instance or that moment in which the Pope would come, but also for Indigenous peoples within this country to begin to form a relationship with an institution that has, for the most part, perpetrated incredible injustices and atrocities against us.
As the National Chief was saying, he referred to the Pope as being open-minded and sympathetic. We know he has expressed sorrow, but as we know, no formal apology. So what is the difference then between expressing sorrow for what has happened and actually saying, on behalf of the Catholic Church, we are sorry?
Well, it's like an owning of the responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's taking accountability for what has occurred. It's very clear, and we're particularly finding, even as of today, more and more unmarked graves. Those unmarked graves are unmarked for the most part because of neglect by schools run by Catholic priests and nuns, but also those headstones were removed by those same institution as well. And so the fact is that there was not just a matter of neglect of children in schools paid for by the Canadian government, run by the Church, but that there was a culpability, there was an awareness, and almost a cover-up in terms of looking at the ways children died at these places. The fact is that if there is no instance or actions or gestures from the Church in order to enact that, frankly, that 2009 expression of regret to Phil Fontaine is just a beginning of what should be done by the Catholic Church. The sense of apology is a first moment, as we saw with the Canadian government apology, a moment in which we can reflect and then perhaps make a step forward together.
You mentioned that new remains have been found now in Canada. I wonder, as we are now expecting more to be found at the sites of other former residential schools in this country, some of the searching is now beginning and the underground radar being used for that. What do you want Canadians to keep in mind as we keep hearing of these discoveries?
Well, unfortunately, there's more yet to come. Estimates are likely in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000 students who have died at the schools. And we're now hearing we're up to 1,300 now. The fact is that there are more and more sites, not just those that are recorded by the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but that within those school walls, there was rampant death and abuse and at times murder. If we face that reality, it is very likely that over the 150 years of operation or 140 some years of operation of those schools, we're going to hear more and more about those situations which children were facing, and Canadians should be prepared for what Indigenous peoples have always known, which is that this school system was for the purposes of the extermination of children in the program of genocide that Indigenous peoples have experienced. And that's hard to hear, I know. But most importantly, we have to accept it, we have to recognize it, and then collectively together decide what we're going to do about it.
The chief, Perry Bellegarde, said he believes that, in his words, he says those 215 young spirits, referring to the Kamloops discovery, the first discovery that we heard of a few weeks ago, have woken up Canada and indeed the world. And I wonder, he sounded almost optimistic that there is an awakening, that there is a reckoning happening in Canada, referring to the fact that he believes Canada Day is still Canada's Day tomorrow, but that it will be it'll be treated differently, with reflection and a spiritual reflection on what we're finding. I wonder, do you share that sense of optimism? Are you seeing a sea change in terms of people's awareness in this country?
Yeah, tomorrow will be a moment for this country, perhaps for the first time, to grow up. And what I mean by that is facing the reality of what it has done, what it has participated in. And in many cases, this will look like consequences to many Canadians, but what it really is responsibility. The responsibility of relationships to one another. And when harms are perpetrated, those don't just go away. Those don't just disappear. That's kind of like an immature way to think about it. And frankly, that's the way Canada has acted, saying things like, let's move on, it's in the past, and so on. It's not in the past, it's still happening. The legacies of residential schools and the Indian Act and the ongoing occupation of Indigenous lands, which is approximately 99% of Canada, most of it's stolen. The fact is that is still occurring today. People are still living on the streets, people are still living in poverty, people are still over-policed and murdered and missing. The fact is that if we don't face that reality, then we'll continue to live in an immature country that's full of half-truths and maple syrupy stories of nationalistic pride, and will not talk about what is the true story of Canada, which is that Canada has done some great things, but it's also perpetrated an incredible genocide against Indigenous peoples, my peoples. And that the fact is that for us to move together, we have to both recognize, understand it, what Indigenous peoples have always known, listen, and then find a way to work with this moment, this time together, to begin to perform restitution, to begin to revitalize Indigenous languages, to work together, and then ultimately, then perhaps we can have a conversation on reconciliation. It will be the worst Canada Day tomorrow because we've got to face conversations we've never had, but it'll also be the best Canada Day because it will be the truest that we've had so far. Maybe
the most important. Niigaan, a final thought from you. We have seen another 2 Roman Catholic churches set on fire, one of them a century-old church that burned to the ground. Chief Bellegarde spoke about that in his news conference, saying it is not the right reaction to tear things down. I wonder what your thoughts are and any connection you see between the churches burning and the attention on residential schools and your message on that front.
Yeah, well, first off, we don't know who did that. No one that I've heard of has been held to account or charged with that. So we don't know who perpetrated that. But let's pretend for a moment if it was an Indigenous person. Let's get some scope here and let's get some perspective. 150 years of violent, genocidal removal of territories, removal of children, violence against those children, as we're witnessing now and experiencing now. And then, yes, the response to that has been people who are angry and perhaps taking action into their own hands. What that really says is how slow the change has been and how frustrated people are, frankly. And if I'm not condoning that vandalism. In fact, what should happen perhaps is those people who do those actions should be held to account. In fact, there's no people who would like those people held to more account than Indigenous peoples who are into discussing restorative justice. What is it that's happening? How do these crimes or events or harms occur? And then ultimately, what do we do about it? How do we share solutions together? But perhaps the most important thing here is to understand that if it is Indigenous people, we don't know that for sure, it is evidence of a country that has for a very long period of time perpetrated incredible harms and is experiencing what is an understandable reaction to a frustrating and frankly untenable situation. And if we don't do something about it more, we may see more actions because the government moves so slow on reconciliation. It says things like boil water advisories or lifting those things as reconciliation. That's not reconciliation. We need to treat Indigenous peoples like human beings and then we can maybe have a conversation on reconciliation. That's the kind of things that need to happen. And frankly, I'm not surprised that people would take action such as this. I don't condone it, but I certainly understand it.
Niigaan, we always appreciate your insights on this. Thank you for joining us again today.
Yeah, miigwech, thank you very much.